It has been said that social media isn't inherently good or bad. It's a mirror. It reflects who we are, what we value, and sometimes the insecurities we try the hardest to hide. Let's talk about social media and character on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have the clinical director at Sound Mind Counseling, Mr. Taylor Bell, with me on today's episode. Taylor, welcome to the program.
Matt, thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to my wife the other day. Of course, she has had your kids in class, or at least one of your kids in class, and she was talking about the other day the university day where you spoke at, and we were gone. Me and my son Riley were gone to Tunica to do some door knocking for them, so we missed it. But I told her, I said, I'm pretty sure we're going to touch on some of the same things he might have touched on in the university day with social media, self-worth, identity, and things like that. So I said, I think I might get to hear some of it from there. So I'm glad to have you on today.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here, and we definitely are going to recap some of those things that we talked about, and I'll reference that a little bit later. But
yeah, I think it'll be a good conversation, very relevant for today, talking about social media and character, but also self-worth and some of those things we'll get into today. Before we get started, we mentioned you were the clinical director at Sound Mind Counseling. Give us a little bit of background about yourself so our listeners know who you are.
Yeah, so I graduated from Freed-Hardeman with a BA in Bible in 2014 and a master's in clinical mental health counseling in 2018. So after my undergraduate work, I worked with a couple of different congregations in my season as a full-time preacher with the Fair Dealing Church of Christ in Benton, Kentucky, Fairfield Church in Centerville, Tennessee, Juneau Church in Lexington. And then after I completed my graduate work, I worked to become fully licensed, as a licensed professional counselor after working in a variety of mental health settings, including community mental health clinics, residential rehab facilities. Then I started my own private practice here in Henderson, Sound Mind Counseling. And that's where I get to see a lot of people with a variety of different things that they've got going on in their lives: anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, behavioral disorders like addictions, things like that.
So you see a lot of different people, and each one is not the same. So a lot of the things that are dealing with, I mean, I'm sure you deal with older people, but also younger people, which is this podcast deals a lot with younger people, specifically character, moral development, sometimes a little bit of anxiety that happens as a result of different things. And a big one of those is social media, like we've talked about. There's a lot different ways that children grow up now than probably the generation we grew up in, just because there is a lot of these different things with social media. And probably when we were growing up, we would have dealt with some of these same things because it was just been a normal part of life. For us now, it seems a little bit like, well, we didn't have that when we were growing up and we were just fine. But if we were growing up and that's all we knew, that's probably how we would behave too, as far as validating our self-worth because of social media, the things that we see on there. So from your experience as a counselor, what are some of the most common struggles that people in general, maybe young people and specifically here, face with self-image because of social media?
Where do you want me to start?
Yeah.
It's genuinely a challenge to find someone with a self-image problem that isn't in some way related to social media. People see inequality and they perceive inadequacy. So, when you get on social media, it doesn't really take long for you to realize, there's some maybe glaring inequalities here. Like there are people who have more than me that are capable of more talents, what have you. And we see that inequality and perceive inadequacy. The amazing things that people have accomplished, the cool vacations they get to go on, how put together their lives are. And when we look around and we say, well, I haven't accomplished that.
What's wrong with me?
I'm older. Yeah, I'm older than them. Like I don't go on vacations like that. My life isn't as clean and simple as theirs is. So there must be something wrong with me. I must not be as good of a person. So there are those inequalities that we become aware of that changes how we see ourselves. And then there's the whole beauty culture that affects the way that especially girls view themselves. And it's not exclusively girls, right? Beauty culture, it affects everybody. They look in the mirror and they think, well, I don't look like those supermodels. So again, there must be something wrong with me. So there's the comparison and the unrealistic expectations. And then there's the dependence on validation that we get online. That definitely affects the way we see ourselves. When we start to connect our social media metrics to our worth.
Yeah. How many likes I get? How many followers do I have? Yeah.
Yes. How many eyeballs did I get on me on this post? You know, there could even be an identity crisis happening where people are struggling to distinguish their true self and their online persona. That's another issue that we see with social media and our self-image. People are feeling fractured because who they are online is incongruent with who they are in real life. And they're literally having these crises of identities.
Yeah.
And so inevitably that's going to affect the way that we see ourselves, right? If we feel like a fraud because what we're posting on social media is not real.
I was looking up something too, you know, talking about validation, external validation versus internal validation, where it used to be probably more so with our relationships and different people we interacted with. We had more of that maybe. Our validation was on our personal relationships, achievements that we had that were more internal, you know, like we want to do well because of something for ourselves. And now it's so much external where, you know, we base our validation on whether something's good is on the external factors, like how many people reacted to this. And it's just this whole external versus internal validation, the shift in that from when I was growing up, for me to validate whether I did something well, it's like, well, someone either told me or I had a personal relationship where someone like expressed that to me. And now it's just this whole world out there of social media where, well, I didn't get this many people following me or liking it. And just a whole lot different world now.
Here's the issue. We have prioritized internet connections. We've prioritized our relationships on social media. And we've traded friends for followers. And
not as many personal connections.
Yeah, the real life, nuanced, face-to-face interactions with people. If we had more of those, if we prioritized more of those, then I think we would find more of that validation outside of that social media.
Right. Then we talked about like comparison culture. We talked a lot of times, social media, the big thing we like to do is compare ourselves, whether we're measuring up to some standard that's out there. What are some maybe healthy ways we can guard against that? Maybe specifically for young people that are really in the thick of it, you know, dealing with a lot of these things. Are there some healthy things they can do? Maybe some things you tell your clients that maybe some different ways to look at things to guard against some of that comparison to social media and whatever else we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, social media is just a comparison machine. That's what it does. It gives you the opportunity to compare anything and everything in your life to everyone else's. And comparison is really one of the enemy's oldest and favorite weapons. We can go all the way back to Cain and Abel, right? I mean, Cain and Abel both made sacrifices to God. Abel gave the best that he had, and Cain gave basically what was left over. Cain compared how God received Abel's sacrifice versus how he was received for his own, and he said, "Oh, Abel thinks he's better than me.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go kill him." Right. Like that was comparison.
Yeah.
And so it definitely is something that we need to guard against. Today, I think we tend to make comparisons on social media for a couple of different reasons in a few different ways. We can compare down, right, in order to make ourselves feel better. And that's when we compare ourselves to people that we feel superior to so that we can feel better about
I'm not
ourselves.
as bad as this person.
Yeah,
I feel,
We find the dumpster fires online and we're like, oh, my life is
way better than this.
I mean,
I'm doing okay.
Not that I wouldn't call somebody's life a dumpster fire. As a therapist, that would probably be frowned upon.
No.
But I mean, that's kind of like our mentality when we get on. We can compare down. That makes us feel a little bit better. Other times we compare up, right? Where we look at people we perceive to be superior to us in some way. People with more money, a nicer car, the bigger house, the people who can afford to go on 19 vacations every year, right? This is going to either lead us to feelings of jealousy or inadequacy, or we can try to tear those people down, right? Because if we can tear the people down who have more than we do, then maybe we can feel better about our own situation. After we tear them down, I'd love to say that, well, then we don't feel jealous and inadequate, but
still there.
It's still there. So how do we guard against the comparison trap of social media? Let's start with the most obvious answer here. How do you safeguard against the dangers of drugs? It's avoided altogether. What's the best way to guard against the dangers of social media? Get off it.
Yeah.
Like let's just start there. And I'm not going to like keep banging this drum because this is typically where I tend to land. Like I tell people, if they didn't have a smartphone or if they weren't on social media, I would be out of a job.
Right.
Like that's the reality. So ultimately, the best way to avoid the danger of social media is just get off it. I've never talked to anybody who divorced themselves from social media who said, I really regret getting off of TikTok. No one I know has ever regretted removing themselves from the toxic pressures of social media. As a matter of fact, most of the time I hear people wondering why they didn't do it sooner. They get to that place and they finally are able to free themselves from whatever excuses they make that, well, I can't get off it because this is how I keep up with my family. Well, you can text them too, right? I mean, what I'm saying is, like, we make all kinds of excuses to say, well, I need it. I have to be on this. But most of the time, when people finally do free themselves of it, they wonder why they didn't do it sooner. So what's the best, most efficient, most foolproof way to guard against it? Delete it. Get off. If you can't, then some good practice would be to very carefully and intentionally curate your feeds. As you comb through the people and the channels that you follow or you subscribe to, ask yourself the question, how do I benefit from this? Does this encourage me? Does this uplift me? Or does it leave me feeling discouraged? Unfollow or unsubscribe to the channels and the people who lead you to play that comparison game. I think that's a really good place to start. If you're going to be on it, practice some mindful engagement with social media.
You're right. We work with church camp. We go to church camp in the summer, and one of the rules at the camp we go to is there's no phones. And kids at first are like, no, especially the ones that are old enough to have a phone that are more of the teenagers, I guess. And they're like, no, I can't do that. And then they get a couple days in and they're like, this really isn't that bad. Like, I actually kind of enjoy not having to worry about checking something, and they're actually better able to, learn about maybe the Bible and different things because there's not as many distractions going on. And we find that there's a lot more willingness to open up about things, about their faith and just different things because they're not constantly comparing themselves to other people. So that offline presence is there a lot more than it would be if the social media is around.
Yeah, they're better able to regulate their own emotions in the absence of the phone also, because it's basically an electronic pacifier. Is what we treat it like. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. I've got a couple of other practical boundaries or habits that I could kind of put in place for people who are trying to stay mentally and emotionally healthy while they're using the social media. First is set the actual concrete physical boundaries. Use app timers or your built-in phone features to limit your daily social media use. Now, there are ways around this. Anybody who's ever tried to do this knows that there are ways, or you can just keep hitting the snooze button or the 5 more minutes button, right? You can do that. But any kind of self-regulating boundary you're going to put in place is an opportunity for you to say, maybe I should hop off now. Use intentional check-ins with your phone. So instead of just endlessly doom scrolling, set it on your schedule where you've got 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there, where you're going to get on these social media platforms. You're going to check these things. You're going to scroll. Like, be intentional about it, and instead of letting it be your autopilot go-to, I don't have anything else to occupy me, so I'm going to pull this out. Be intentional about it.
Going back to this idea, though, of like offline identity, online presence, things like that. Is there anything that maybe you tell the different individuals that you counsel and talk with? How do you encourage people to balance their online presence with their offline identity? We talked about those people I work with at camp that they have this offline identity. They don't always show that all the time because they're so focused maybe on what they're doing online, but it's there, But so how maybe can they use some of these things for the good, but also have this offline identity that they need to have that's really important for them to have as well?
That's a good question. I think that going back to some of the boundaries that we can put in place, like establishing some of those healthy boundaries, are going to be important to balancing their online and offline identity, right? If you have digital detox days, like if you'll plan on Friday just being a day that we don't touch our phone. Like we don't use it, or Saturday, whichever day is most feasible for you, right? But actually having digital detox days, that can be so beneficial because then you're opening up an entire day for real life, in-person connection. I encourage people to nurture parts of their lives that don't need to be shared online, whether it's through journaling or prayer and Bible study, family rituals, right? A private self, it reinforces the idea that not everything valuable has to be broadcast. I encourage people to consider these questions before they post. Am I sharing this to connect or to seek validation? Does this align with who I am offline? This helps them use social media as a reflection of their true self rather than a performance.
Yeah. So kind of goes back to this next question I was going to ask. We see this happen a lot of times. Am I posting this for connection or am I posting it for validation? What are some red flags that maybe people could look at in their own life that says, maybe I'm falling into this where I'm doing this mainly just to seek validation and not necessarily for a meaningful connection? Are there some red flags that people can look for that indicate maybe they're relying too much on the likes, followers, and all these things that maybe outside of some of those benefits that social media can bring, maybe they're looking more at the negative side?
Yeah, maybe some red flags to look out for would be excessive monitoring or like total preoccupation.
Yeah.
If you spend a disproportionate amount of time tracking your followers, analytics, your engagement, how many likes, how many retweets, how many whatever, there's a good chance that you're depending on that for something more than just a need for connection, right? If you refresh your apps repeatedly throughout the day, over and over and over, that's a red flag that maybe it's something more than it needs to be in your life. If you experience anxiety, if you can't check your social media, like if you don't have any signal or your phone is dead, that's a good indicator that this has become something that is less than healthy. If your self-worth is linked to your metrics, like if you say or feel like you are not good enough if your engagement drops, that's an indicator. If you use your likes and followers as proof of attractiveness, popularity, or success, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
There's this idea that when we engage and when we depend on social media for validation, we avoid vulnerability, right? Because if we're depending on what other people think about us in this digital space to build what we think about ourselves, then we can't be vulnerable. We can't afford to be, because if people know that I'm struggling or if people know that I'm not perfect, then I won't get the validation from them, which means that I can't then validate myself.
Yeah. It's like an endless cycle of just negative.
Yes.
It's very interesting because we talk a lot on this podcast, and we work a lot on this podcast, talk a lot about athletes and how their identity should not be in their sport, should not be in the things that they're doing, but it should be in something else. Hopefully that's in Christ, right? We talk a lot about that. But I think the same thing could be, like we talked about, validation through social media, thinking about some of those things that we need to have something that we can go back to that is our identity. And hopefully that is our faith, right? Our core values, some of those habits that hopefully we establish early on, which hopefully parents, mentors, and people can help with that. But how have you seen maybe a way that faith, religion, people that maybe our church family, how can those core values serve as an anchor when navigating the pressures of this online image, social media?
Yeah, Christianity is rooted in the love that we have for others that overflows from the love that God has for us. As you mentioned before, I was able to preach at Henderson at the University Day a few weeks ago. And one of the lessons that I preached was all about the story that God tells about us compared to the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
And God says that we are his masterpiece. He says that he designed us perfectly to accomplish his kingdom work. He says that we are enough. He sent his son to die for us and thus deemed us to be enough, right? Christianity is the only way to truly anchor your image in something other than the story that other people tell about you. So there's a couple of Christian values or some tenets that I want to present as a way that we can utilize our Christian faith to anchor us and challenge the pressure to present a flawless image. So the first one is just authenticity. We don't need to hide our imperfections. We sing the song, "Just As I Am," or "I Come Broken." We read the over 200 scriptures referencing honesty and integrity, like Ephesians 4:35. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. But do we practice integrity and authenticity online? See, the world wants aesthetics. God wants authenticity. The second one would be compassion, right? This is just the idea that I want to uplift and not compete. What if we approach the virtual space and our place within it with an attitude of service to others rather than a way to compete with others? The world wants comparison. God wants compassion. The third, I would say, is humility. This is just the idea that I don't have to prove myself online. I don't establish my value or my worth as a person by what I do online. The world exalts hubris. God exalts humility. So those three, authenticity, compassion, humility, those would be three core Christian values that I think that if we would approach the social media space with those things, it would change the way that we interact with it.
And those are great. That's something that's established early on, right? This is something that hopefully is reinforced, whoever it is that these young people are interacting with, whether it's mentors, church family, parents, having those established early on can really help them later on. So we talked about these red flags earlier, and someone might be listening to this podcast and like, man, I think I've maybe got a problem here with social media, because a lot of these things that Taylor talked about, I catch myself doing. I'm refreshing over and over to see how many people have liked a certain post. So say someone finds themselves in that situation, and maybe that they feel like their self-image is already damaged by social media, comparison game, comparison culture, all those things. What are some things maybe you tell them that maybe can help them repair some of those things that they're struggling with?
Yeah, so first of all, I would just want to normalize their experience a little bit. I would tell them that you're not alone. There's a lot of people who feel this way. Social media is designed to highlight comparison, so it makes sense that it can affect how you see yourself. And feeling this way doesn't mean that something is wrong with you, right? I just want to start by leading with a little bit of compassion here and asking you to show a little bit of compassion to yourself. Second, I would encourage them to separate their identity from their metrics, right? That's going to be a really big one. I would remind them that likes, comments, and followers are not a measure of their worth. Their value comes from qualities like character, relationships, talents, values, and ultimately what God has determined you to be. Your identity is found in Him. I would also encourage that person to reset. Detox. Take a break, even briefly, from the platforms that feel the most harmful. I would say detox and curate, right? We've already talked about that. Unfollow the accounts that spark comparison. Follow those that inspire, educate, and uplift. And then maybe we need to build some better rituals in place, right? Because right now the ritual that's in place is we get our phone out when we're bored, when we have 5 seconds that we're not doing something. We get it out, we get on TikTok, we get on Facebook, whatever it is. Replace scrolling time with activities that build real self-esteem, whether it's exercise, creating, volunteering, journaling. And then we need to rebuild our core values. If you are out there and you feel like, oh no, I think that social media has done some damage to the way that I see myself, well, then we need to reestablish who are you, right? We need to rebuild those core values, explore questions like, what do I value most in myself? When do I feel most like me offline? What qualities do I want to be known for? Anchoring in values, I think, can help us form a more stable sense of self-image that isn't tied to the opinions of others. And then to that person, I think I would just want to frame healing as a process. It's not about fixing their image overnight, but really slowly untangling it from social media's grip. Small steps, limiting screen time, journaling emotions after scrolling. And that's a part of that mindful engagement that I wanted to talk about for just a minute.
Yeah.
Mindfully engaging with social media means that you are actively checking in with yourself before you get on. It's asking yourself the question, why am I opening this app right now? Being able to answer that. And then when you're on it, checking in with your body and saying, what am I feeling in my body right now as I scroll? And then after you're done, whatever time period that is, whether you've shortened it down to 15, 30 minutes or it's a doom scroll session, right? When you get done checking in and saying, what emotions are present for me right now? And if we are really mindful with our engagement, I think that changes our relationship with it, because it's so easy for it to just be a mindless, time-wasting, it's called doom scrolling for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But that mindful engaging, that's something that we're working towards. This healing is a process.
Yeah. And a lot of it goes back to, like you mentioned, self-awareness, right? Like being aware of why it is that you're doing things, and that's true for any part of life, social media probably in particular. Why am I engaging in this social media app? Why am I doing this? And having that awareness of yourself, I think, is helpful. I think also, kind of going to this next point I was wanting to touch on a little bit is how can parents, teachers, or mentors, we talked about how they can help establish some of these core values like you mentioned, but what's the role that parents, teachers, or mentors play in helping young people maybe develop that resilience we talked about a little bit earlier, and positive outlook, self-image, things like that? What role do they play in that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that those parents, teachers, and mentors can do. The first is to model healthy digital habits.
Show them how they're supposed to use it.
Show them how to use it. Let the young people see adults taking breaks from their devices, setting boundaries, prioritizing in-person connections. Just set the example for them. Also, normalize phone-free zones for them, whether it's the dinner table or bedtime or car rides. Kids inevitably are going to mirror more what they see rather than what they're told. So we've got to start by making some changes ourselves as the adults. But secondly, I would say we can create open conversations. Encourage honest dialogue about what they're seeing online, how it makes them feel, the difference between their online image versus reality. Instead of shaming or lecturing, we can use curiosity. Even asking some of those questions of the mindful engagement, like, what do you notice when you scroll? What are you feeling after you've been online for a while? And then we can certainly anchor them in core values, reinforce that their worth is rooted in God and character and not in numbers or appearance. And then we really need to build resilience in our kids, some of those resiliency skills. Teach critical thinking to our kids, right? Talk about the algorithms, talk about advertising, talk about why those perfect posts exist. And if you don't know enough to speak intelligently on those issues, then why in the world are you allowing your kids to have free reign in a world you know nothing about?
Yeah.
Right? Be able to have an intelligent conversation with them about it. Promote those self-compassion practices so that setbacks online don't define their identity. There's so many things that we can do. The big ones, though, are just to model healthy social media practices, teach them to be resilient, anchor them in their core values. We can celebrate their offline growth. We need to be pouring into them. Like you were mentioning before, like when we were growing up, where did we find a sense of like satisfaction?
Whether we did good or something that's fun.
Yeah. Somebody poured into us.
Yep.
Somebody was able to say, hey, great job. This test that you made a great grade on it. Or even if it was a buddy, like, hey, you beat Super Mario World level 4. Like, that's awesome.
Yep.
We need people pouring into us. And so it's our job as parents, as mentors, as teachers to really be pouring into these kids.
Yeah. The one of the final, I guess, questions, and then we'll kind of see if there's anything else that you want to add to this. We talked a little bit, and I do this a lot when I talk about social media. I tend to focus a lot on the negative things of social media because there's so many negatives, right? And if at all possible, it is better probably just to not be on social media. Maybe what are some ways that we can use social media? And if we're talking to young people, anybody that uses social media, what are some ways we can encourage them to use it for good? And maybe some ways they can maybe not have the negative effects of social media if they're using it in the right way. We talked about limiting time that you're on there, but maybe what are some encouragement things that we could tell our young people? This is some ways you can use it for good.
I do think that there are some ways that we can use social media to build character, to strengthen their self-image. And the first is going to be something, I'm going to be a broken record here for a minute. We've got to be very intentional about what we are following. I mean, follow the uplifting and growth-oriented accounts. Curate your feeds to include voices that model kindness, perseverance, and positivity. This is going to turn the platform into a steady stream of encouragement rather than that comparison machine. Second, I would say practice encouragement and empathy. Use your comments, use your messages to uplift others rather than competing with them. It amazes me what people are willing to say online behind the safety of their screen that they would never in a million years say to somebody to their face.
Yep.
What if we just treated social media like an extension of a face-to-face interaction? If we used our comments and our words the same way that we would in person. Use them to build people up, not to compete with them, not to tear them down. Intentionally leave thoughtful and kind remarks. This trains empathy. It helps shift our focus from getting affirmation to giving it. And that's going to be so much more productive for a young person and for really all of us. I would say use your social media to document growth and not just your highlights. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Share your progress stories or your lessons learned or your struggles overcome. Treat your profile like a journal of growth instead of a highlight reel. Right? This reframes imperfections as a part of a meaningful journey. Those are some things. There are others, but those are definitely some ways that we can use social media to.
Yeah, I'm sitting here writing things down. I like use it as a journal of growth and not as a highlight reel. I think just that expression alone, I mean, a lot of people could benefit from that. I mean, because again, it goes back to why am I posting this? Am I posting this to encourage, to connect, or am I posting it just to promote myself or to validate myself in some way? And if we're self-aware, constantly looking at those things before we post, or if we choose to be on a platform at all, that's definitely gonna help us. It's all in the mindset that we got, right? And it's where our identity is. If our identity is in those likes, follows, and everything, and that's where we're going to get validation from. It's going to fail you every time.
We're in trouble there.
Yeah. And if our identity's in Christ and the people that we connect with and the people that we're trying to encourage, it's going to be a lot better. Yes. And we don't need social media for that. We can connect with people without social media, right? So
yeah, here's my parting thought here.
Yeah.
Go outside.
Yeah.
Meet a friend for coffee. Put your feet in the grass or something.
Yeah.
But our kids need to experience that freedom and the childhood that we had.
Yeah.
Like that's so beneficial. Let them go play in the creek. Yeah. Give them a walkie-talkie if you want to, right?
Taylor, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been great. And now I've kind of got to hear some of the lesson that you told at Henderson a few weeks ago. So I've valued from that and really appreciate you coming on. Appreciate the work you do at Sound Mind Counseling and everything that you do for young people and everybody that you work with in your practice.
Thanks, man. Yep. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Taylor Bell for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.